Hey guys, today you're stepping into the tight, humming belly of the USS Thresher, America's most advanced nuclear submarine. In 1963 America, you probably won't survive this. The fluorescent lights above you buzz with a faint flicker as you duck through the hatch. The air is filtered, dry, faintly metallic, with just a hint of oil and coffee. Beneath your boots, the deck plates are cool and solid, but the chill doesn't just come from the steel. It's the ocean. It's waiting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all watching from. Journey together. You trudge deeper into the Thresher's hull, shoulders brushing against racks of wires, bundled piping, and handwritten labels in grease pencil. Every inch of this space is engineered, not for comfort, but survival. Mostly, it's early 1963, and you're shadowing the 129 men who live and work in this underwater fortress. Some are seasoned submariners who've sailed through Cold War tension. Others are rookies, barely through nuclear school, still awkward in their white coveralls. Either way, every man here is in this steel tube because they believe in something, or at least because the Navy pointed and said, "You, go deep." The USS Thresher isn't just another boat. She's the lead ship of her class, the first in a new breed of fast attack submarines, meant to stalk Soviet vessels in the cold black of the Atlantic. Thresher can dive deeper, move quieter, and launch faster than any American sub before her. And she looks good doing it. If you're into that whole pressure hull death trap aesthetic, you pass the control room. Men are hunched over dials and panels, all manual toggles and blinking bulbs. Computer screens? Not quite. This is analog precision, where a spinning gyro and a man with steady hands steer you 1,000 feet below the surface. Everything around you hisses, clicks, or hums. Even the silence here has a sound. In the galley, there's a tinny radio playing doo-wop. Someone's laughing over freeze-dried eggs, and a petty officer is cursing mildly about the instant coffee tasting like boot polish filtered through a sock. You'll get used to it, but don't let the domestic vibe fool you. This is a war machine. 45 nuclear-tipped torpedoes can be loaded within minutes. The Thresher isn't here for games. She's built to kill, quietly, and vanish without trace. You squeeze into the reactor space. It's warm here, buzzing with invisible menace. The ship's nuclear heart beats with confidence. Thresher's S5W reactor, a marvel of 1950s engineering, powers everything from propulsion to life support. You hear a mechanic tapping gently on a pressure gauge, muttering about calibration. A few more PSI off, and, well, let's not think about that. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. At the time of her launch in 1960, USS Thresher, utilitarian, Commander John Wesley Harvey's name is stenciled on the door. A quiet man, respected, former physicist. Not much of a shouter. He believed in procedure, and he trusted his crew. You imagine him sitting at his tiny desk, reviewing dive charts, sipping Navy-issue coffee, perhaps wondering if one last systems test was truly necessary. Spoiler, it was. Outside the quarters, a damage control drill blares. Red lights flash. You stumble into a mock emergency. Fire in compartment 3. The team rushes, gas masks on, rehearsing the difference between reaction time and obituary length. The drill ends. Smiles crack. Someone makes a joke about melting socks. Someone else logs the time. 47 seconds. Not bad, but not perfect. Back in the torpedo room, a technician tells you that the soundproofing mats meant to deaden their acoustic signature, sometimes peel off in humidity. Not exactly mission critical, but it messes with sonar readings. And sonar, down here, is everything. You run your fingers along the inner hull, just cold steel between you and crushing black. That's the gamble every man here accepts. That the welds hold, that the valves don't stick, that the emergency blow system doesn't hiccup when you need to surface at 400 feet per minute. Because here's the part they don't put in the brochures. When you're deep enough, even the ocean forgets you exist. A young sonar operator waves you over, pointing at a readout. It's mostly background noise, whale song, propeller, chop, distant pings. But he's learned to tell the difference between a friendly escort and something foreign, lurking, waiting. You glance at the screen. There's nothing now, just the void. But the silence isn't reassuring. It never really is. You're back in motion, following the rhythm of a crew that runs like clockwork, mostly because they've practiced every possible failure scenario until it lives in their bones. It's mid-March, 1963. The Thresh is docked at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, undergoing post-shakedown maintenance after her first few years at sea. You stretch your shoulders in a narrow passageway, trying not to knock over a clipboard-laden junior officer muttering about valve seals. Again. Training on this boat isn't like what you imagine from movies. No shouting sergeants or dramatic speeches. It's quieter. A bit more like death by checklist. Submariners live and breathe systems. Power, propulsion, ballast, weapons. If it can break, they've rehearsed what happens next. The crew gathers for a simulated scram, emergency reactor shutdown. It's not flashy, no dramatic sparks, just a sudden shift in tone. Voices flatten, steps quicken. You're ordered to stand clear. Within seconds, every man is where he should be. Some hold wrenches, others press gauges. One guy furiously flips through a laminated manual like it's sacred scripture. Because it kind of is. Reactor back online, the chief says, and the crew collectively exhales like it's the first breath they've come. Earned in 10 minutes. Later, you sit at the long metallic mess table while a machinist's mate shows off a sketch of his baby daughter, mailed with a Polaroid and a crayon doodle. The submarine might be a marvel of technology, but fatherhood still survives at 400 feet. And here's where the quirks shine. One of the crew, everyone calls him Radar, because of course they do, has an actual monkey wrench he claims is lucky. He kisses it before every dive. It's slightly bent. No one asks why. Maintains never ends. During this yard period, Thresher's systems are torn apart, examined, rebuilt. Cables hang loose. Valves are replaced. There's a lot of debate over the silver-brazed piping, used extensively for seawater systems in Thresh. It's light, efficient, and, depending on who you ask, a ticking time bomb. During ultrasonic tests, several joints fail inspection. Some are redone. Others are, let's say, not as thoroughly documented. And yes, this is your mainstream historical fact. The Thresh underwent an extensive overhaul at Portsmouth, which included inspecting and replacing thousands of feet of piping, some of which, in hindsight, should have received a bit more attention. While welders work overhead, sailors train on emergency maneuvers using makeshift diagrams pinned to the bulkhead. The air tastes like burnt metal and stale coffee. You watch a young fireman trace the hydraulic system on a schematic with his finger, lips moving as he whispers through the flow paths. If he gets this wrong in a pinch, people die. Simple as that. Of course, even training breaks have their rituals. One evening, after hours of crawling through bilges and trying to reset a finicky valve actuator, the crew celebrates with, what else? Instant macaroni and powdered lemonade. Someone busts out a harmonica. A game of cards starts up in the torpedo room. Stakes? Loser gets cleanup duty in the head. You wouldn't think it, but humor is a key survival tool down here. Someone has drawn a cartoon of the captain riding a torpedo like a cowboy. Captioned, "Yeehaw, nuclear diplomacy." Another posted sign over a broken ventilation grill reads, "Caution, portal to another dimension. Do not enter without permission." Still, cracks exist, literal and figurative. One torpedoman mentions in a low voice that he's seen leaks in non-critical joints, and they're patched for now. The problem, what's non-critical at sea level, might be a death sentence at 1,000 feet. Historians still argue whether these minor maintenance issues were known, tolerated, or simply lost in the fog of Cold War urgency. After all, the Navy was rushing ahead. The Soviets were snapping at their heels. No one wanted to be the guy who said, "Hey, maybe we slow down." You lean against the cold wall of the operations compartment. Someone offers you a sip of truly awful black coffee. It's been sitting there so long, it might legally qualify as oil. You take it anyway. During drills, the mood shifts. A sudden emergency blow drill kicks off, and compressed air thunders through pipes like an angry god. Ballast tanks are forced empty, and the sub surges upward. Well, in theory, on paper. In real life, the system's never been tested at full depth. This is the part that makes your stomach tighten. The emergency blow system relies on high-pressure air stored in tanks, but as maintenance reports quietly note, moisture buildup can freeze valves. Ice at 1,000 feet isn't just annoying, it's fatal. Still, the crew presses on. Each man knows his job. They trust in another. You watch them run the procedures again, and again, and again, until it's reflex. You're in the machinery space now, where things clank and hiss in a mechanical symphony. You can barely hear yourself think, but the machinist mates thrive in this chaos. There's a story about one of them, Big Mike, who once fixed a backup coolant pump with a spoon and a rubber glove. It's probably not true. Then again, maybe it is. Quirky tidbit? The crew used to prank each other with fake sonar contacts, tapping codes on bulkheads, making junior guys panic about unidentified bogies. It's the kind of joke that only feels funny when you're not 800 feet underwater with twitchy nerves. Outside, the Atlantic stretches wide and indifferent. The Thresher's hull gleams in dry dock, looking like a sleeping shark. You imagine her at sea, silent, gliding beneath merchant ships that never notice the nuclear predator below. Back aboard, there's word of sea trials coming up. A deep dive test. Some groan. Others grin. This is what they've trained for, right? You overhear the captain speaking to the executive officer. Calm, firm, measured. He's confident. Everyone's confident. But you see it now. The fragile balance. One corroded pipe, one frozen valve, one unlogged oversight, and everything shifts from routine to catastrophe. The final systems checks begin. Inventory is tallied, food stores packed, letters home written in tidy, hopeful lines. The Thresher is almost ready. So are you. I can't stand in the engine room when the final systems checks become complete. I stood the engine. When the final systems checks become complete. When the final systems checks stood for fire. The ink isn't even dry before someone yells, "We're in go for sea trials." That phrase hits with the weight of a drumbeat. This isn't a drill. You're about to dive. The date looming now is April 9th, 1963. The USS Thresher is prepped for her post-overhaul sea trials, scheduled to begin the next morning. You move alongside the crew as they make final arrangements. loading supplies, recalibrating gauges, double-checking welds with all the forced calm of people pretending everything's perfectly fine. They don't look nervous exactly, but you notice something in the silences, little things. A technician stares a beat too long at a high-pressure air gauge. A junior officer rechecks a valve list, even though it was verified 10 minutes ago. One sailor jokes about hoping the coffee machine holds pressure better than knees. The seawater systems. Everyone laughs a little too hard. You're walking through a prototype. A beautiful one, yes. But it's not just cutting edge. It's still bleeding. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Thresher's class was a revolution in submarine design. Sleeker, faster, quieter. Her hull form was optimized for silent running, and she introduced innovations that would become standard in future nuclear subs. But underneath that polished promise was an unsettling reality. The extensive use of silver brazed joints, lighter and faster to produce, was already causing headaches. During the shipyard refit, ultrasonic tests found many of these joints cracked or defective. Some were fixed. Some, well, paperwork can be slippery. As a fringe tidbit, there's a lesser-known detail most forget. One civilian technician from Portsmouth Yard was allowed to join this sea trial. Just one. He packed a camera. He never came back. Historians still argue whether his presence was to document technical performance or quietly observe problems that didn't make it into the official paperwork. April 10th. Dawn's grey, the Atlantic stretching cold and featureless beyond the horizon. You can hear the tide slapping against the hull as final goodbyes are exchanged. Families wave from the dock, bundled in coats against the New England wind. Someone's wife holds up a hand-lettered sign. "Come back safe, Thresher." You remember that. You slide below deck. The air inside smells scrubbed and metallic. Everything's stowed. The mood isn't tense, it's routine. That's the most dangerous part. Catastrophes love routine. The crew is ready. Captain Harvey moves like a man who trusts his ship. And he should. He's done this before. So has most of the crew. But today's dive isn't just another shakedown. It's deep test trials, pushing the Thresher closer to her crush depth than she's been since her launch. They need to see how the repairs hold under pressure. You're not alone out here. On the surface, the submarine rescue ship USS Skylark is assigned to shadow the Thresher. Her job? Monitor communications and stand by for emergencies. Standard protocol, friendly insurance, like having an ambulance at a roller derby. The Thresher begins her dive. She slips below the waves with practiced ease. No drama, no fanfare, just steel disappearing into blue. Inside, you feel the shift in your bones. Pressure mounting. Lights dim slightly to conserve power. Fans hum louder. In the control room, men cluster around depth gauges. One engineer marks descent data in grease pencil. The dive is scheduled in stages. Pause, check, adjust. You're heading down toward 1,300 feet. You grab a rail as the angle of descent shifts slightly. Outside, the world turns ink black. The only light is inside the hull now. The ocean is close, and it wants in. Over comms, the Thresher checks in with Skylark. We are proceeding to depth of 400 feet, 600, 1,000. The voice is calm, nothing out of place. But you're watching a control valve rattle. Just a little. Just enough. Now remember that emergency blow system, the one that's never been tested at full depth, it's on standby. Just in case. Moisture could freeze the valves shut. But that's unlikely, right? This is all standard, routine, necessary. At 1,300 feet, the deepest test depth for this trial, the Thresher stabilizes, all systems holding, or appearing to. You're drifting near the forward compartments when it begins. A sharp clang, somewhere near the engine room. Just one, but the kind of sound that isn't supposed to happen. Then another. You feel it in your feet. A pipe, a joint, a silver-brazed fitting under full pressure. You rush toward the control room. Orders are flying. Check hull integrity. Reduce depth. Secure propulsion. A sonar tech shouts something over the alarm. You don't catch the words, but you catch the panic. Fresh radio Skylark. Experiencing minor difficulties. Have positive up angle. Attempting to blow. Then static. Not silence. Static. You hang there in it. The crew frozen around you. Somewhere behind a bulkhead, water might be flooding. Fast. Or maybe it's a pump. Maybe it's nothing. But this ship doesn't allow second guesses. A second transmission crackles through. Garbled. Bits of phrases. Possibly. Test depth. Exceed. Then gone. On Skylark, topside, they try again. Thresher, reporter position. Nothing. Only a single sonar ping, then the unmistakable echo of something descending. Fast. You feel it. The boat shudders. Tilt increases. Air systems engage. It's the emergency glow. But the rush isn't smooth. It sputters. The hull creaks. Lights flicker. And then you understand. The air valves might be frozen. You hear someone curse softly. Something about moisture traps. Another engineer yells about power loss. Reactor? Auxiliary systems? You don't know. No one does. But you're descending faster. Historians still argue whether the silver-brazed pipe failure caused an electrical short, which shut down the reactor, which stopped propulsion, which killed the hydraulic systems, which stopped the emergency blow, or whether it was reversed, or all of it, or none of it. What is known is that the Thresher stopped rising and started falling. You grip a bulkhead as the boat groans like a dying animal. You're past design depth now. Every inch of hull is fighting the ocean. Steel flexes like rubber. A pipe bursts behind you, flooding a compartment in seconds. One of the crew tries to seal it manually, face pale. The valve sticks. You don't see the crush. You only feel the air ripple. A sudden stillness. And then, the static over Skylark's radio fades into silence. You're gone. Just like that. 129 souls aboard the most advanced submarine of its time. No explosion, no fireball. No smoke trail curling into the sky. Just a disappearance. Silent, final. Swallowed by 8,400 feet of cold, crushing Atlantic water. Above, on the surface, Skylark is still pinging sonar into the deep. They think it's comms trouble. Happens all the time. The ocean's weird like that. They don't panic right away. There's a tense wait, long minutes of quiet hailing calls and squinting at scopes, hoping to see something, anything, that confirms Thresher is still down there and just playing hard to get. Nothing pings back. Now, they know. You're with the crew in that final moment, or what little anyone can imagine of it. It's still debated exactly what happened. A pipe joint fails. Seawater sprays onto electrical panels. The reactor scrams. Propulsion cuts. The ship starts to descend uncontrollably. Emergency systems activate, but air valves freeze. No power, no thrust. The Thresher is now a steel bullet, falling toward its limit. Let this sink in, literally. At that depth, the pressure is over 3,500 pounds per square inch. That's like parking 150 elephants on every square foot of hull. The Thresh is engineered for pressure, but only up to a point. Once you exceed test depth, every extra foot down is a gamble. One leak becomes 20. Pipes burst like veins, bulkheads collapse inward, and when the hull gives, it doesn't implode in slow motion like in the movies. It takes milliseconds. Some experts estimate the crew never felt a thing. One moment there's steel, breath, heat. The next, there's nothing but pulverized debris and a pressure wave too fast for thought. Back aboard Skylark, reality hits hard. They declare an emergency and call for help. The Navy scrambles ships, planes launch, a search begins. But they know, everyone knows, the ocean doesn't give back what it takes. Not easily. April 11th, 1963, dawns with headlines. USS Thresher missing. Families crowd around televisions, ears pressed to radios. The Navy's language is cautious. They talk about delayed communications and continued search efforts. But by nightfall, the truth bleeds through. The Thresher is lost. In New Hampshire, at Portsmouth Yard, where the sub was refitted, there's stunned silence. Workers who welded those pipes, engineers who signed off the inspections, officers who oversaw the timeline, they all feel it. That familiar guilt of maybe if. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The loss of USS Thresher was the deadliest submarine disaster in US history. 129 people, officers, enlisted men, and civilians, gone in a single dive. No survivors, no wreckage visible from the surface. Just sonar echoes, a few oil slicks, and too many unanswered questions. And here's your offbeat detail. For hours out of the loss, one of the sonar buoys reportedly picked up soft rhythmic sounds from the deep. Taps, almost Morse code-like. The Navy dismissed it as underwater debris settling. Some insisted it was something more. A final, futile signal from a pressure-locked tomb. Historians still argue whether these signals were ever real or imagined by men who desperately needed to believe someone was alive down there. In the days that follow, Navy divers prepare for the impossible. They deploy deep-sea camera sleds, sonar tows, and, eventually, bathyscaphs capable of standing the immense depths. But the Atlantic doesn't cooperate. The search area is vast, uncharted, hostile. Meanwhile, funerals are held, without bodies, without wreckage. Just flags, folded in precise triangles, and empty chairs in the front row. At one ceremony, a sailor's daughter asks quietly, "Can the ocean eat a whole ship?" Her grandfather, a World War II vet, doesn't answer. On shore, grief becomes bureaucratic. Committees form, reports are drafted, names are typed. The Navy launches a formal inquiry, the Court of Inquiry, which tries to piece together what happened using technical data, acoustic recordings, and expert testimony. They play a tape recorded by Skylark, capturing the final sonar signature of the Thresher. It's cold, mechanical. A descent, a rumble, then a sharp crack, followed by a series of implosion pulses. Even the analysts flinch hearing it. You imagine the courtrooms, the white uniforms, the charts, the endless pointing at diagrams. Here's the likely failure point. Here's where the reactor shut down. Here's where the emergency blow system likely failed. It's analysis without recovery, theory without proof. Months pass. The story fades from headlines, but stays etched in Navy memory. You're not forgotten. The Thresher's crew are named in quiet services. Brass plaques, a whisper in training briefings. Remember the Thresher. New sailors are told the tale like a ghost story, one wrapped in warning, in awe, and in deep respect. You return now to that last moment because you have to. Imagine the control room, the dim nights, the dive alarm still echoing off the bulkheads. A young sailor gripping a rail, knuckles white. The captain issuing calm orders through clenched teeth. And the pressure climbing, second by second. There's something terrifying in how ordinary it all seems, right up to the end. That's the part that lingers. Not the implosion, the fact that no one screamed. You drift in silence now, weightless, speechless, deep beneath what's survivable. It's August 1963, 4 months since the Thresher vanished. The Atlantic is still vast, still cold, and still refusing to give up its dead. But the search continues. You ride with the oceanographic research vessel Mizar, part of a growing fleet tasked with combing the seafloor. Slowly, painstakingly, pixel by pixel, ping by ping. What are you looking for? Shattered steel, anything recognizable. A hatch, a propeller blade, a nameplate with SSN-593 stamped in salt-pitted brass. Some proof that the Thresher didn't just disappear into myth. You lean over a sonar console. The screen glows green and grainy. Sonar text speaking clip tones. Possible contact, Sector B4, and nothing. False positives, seafloor ridges, wrecks from other wars. The ocean's memory is cluttered. But on one quiet morning, someone says, "I think we've got her." It's not much, just a strange blip on the sonar, an unusual scatter pattern, far deeper than most equipment wants to go. You adjust a camera sled, lower it down through miles of freezing water, lightless and dense. A feed crackles. And there, finally, you see it. Shattered steel, twisted bulkheads, a section of sail, torn and bent like tinfoil. Thresher has been found. The wreck is scattered across a wide debris field, over a mile below the surface. You scan slowly. Here's the sonar dome. There's the rudder. A section of hull rests like a broken rib cage, half buried in silt. You're looking at fragments now, not a whole. The pressure was so intense the sub imploded in pieces, instantly, violently, and completely. Here's your historical anchor. The Navy confirmed Thresher's final resting place in September 1963, about 220 miles east of Cape Cod. She lies in 5 major sections, broken apart by pressure well beyond her crush depth. It's as deep as any US submarine has ever gone, at least intentionally. Crews aboard Mizar and Trieste too. A deep diving bathyscape, work in shifts. Every discovery down there is logged, photographed, and marked for the investigation. They find mugs, helmets, a shattered ladder, tiny details that belong to real people. You pause at the image of a pressure gauge still bolted to a console, its needle frozen forever. Aboard ship, someone quietly takes off his hat. Another technician murmurs, "They're all home, now." You don't say anything. You just watch. But even with the wreck found, questions rise faster than answers. The Navy's official report points to a mechanical failure, most likely a brazed pipe joint, letting seawater flood an area near the reactor. The crew couldn't stop the leak. The water shorted out electrical panels, caused a reactor shutdown, and left the sub powerless. Emergency systems failed. Air valves froze. The submarine descended uncontrollably. Implosion followed. Open and shut? Not quite. Here's your scholarly debate. Some engineers insist the reactor could have restarted. Others argue the new design made that nearly impossible without external power. Some claim human error played a role. Others blame rushed inspections, flawed engineering, or plain bad luck. There's no cockpit voice recorder, no black box, just twisted steel and theories. You now ride along with the families. Grief changes shape in 4 months. At first it's disbelief, then hope, then fury. The Navy promises answers, improvements, honors. But can that ever match the weight of 129 caskets that never came home? A few family members start writing to Congress. One woman, the wife of a young electrician's mate, demands to know whether substandard parts were knowingly installed. She gets a vague reply. The Navy remains committed to ensuring future safety. Bureaucratic balm on an open wound. Then come the conspiracy theories. Quiet ones at first, then louders. Was there a cover-up? Was Thresh pushed too far, too fast, too soon? Did the Navy prioritize prestige over safety? You hear whispers of classified test data, of unlogged valve replacements, of rushed sign-offs on critical systems. A few ex-shipyard workers speak anonymously about pressure from upstairs. Others dismiss it all as speculative grief. Here's your quirky detail. Among the stranger theories, one particularly persistent group insisted Thresh collided with a Soviet sub and was covered up during the Cold War. Their evidence included strange sonar echoes picked up days before and gaps in the Navy's timeline. No formal proof ever surfaced. But when truth is shattered and scattered like wreckage, stories fill the gaps. Back under the ocean, the salvage crews mark the site. A quiet reverence hangs in the water. The sea is not loud. It does not apologize. You pass the wreck one more time. Each broken piece is a frozen instant. A man was here, laughing about instant coffee. Another was tracing pipe routes on a clipboard. Another was reading a letter from home. Now, just fragments. And yet, some good comes from the loss. The Navy, shaken deeply by Thresh, knows it can't afford another tragedy like this. The investigation leads to a massive shift in submarine protocols, a new standard. It's called Subsafe. You step into the timeline as the program is born. Subsafe becomes the Navy's strictest set of submarine safety protocols, tracking every pipe, weld, valve, and system from construction to final deployment. Every nut and bolt must be documented, tested, verified. No exceptions, no shortcuts. It is, quite literally, built on Thresher's bones. From then on, no US Navy submarine built to Subsafe standards has been lost at sea. Not one. That's the legacy. Not the implosion, not the wreckage. The legacy is the change. Still, as the recovery efforts wind down, the ocean closes its grip. The Thresher's resting place is marked, recorded, and sealed. Few are allowed to visit. Fewer still return. The families never get the bodies. Only the memory, only the silence. And maybe that's what hurts most. The deep doesn't echo. It keeps what it takes. Time shifts again. You surface into 1964, standing now in the quiet, stony embrace of Arlington National Cemetery. There's a memorial here, not a grave, but a cenotaph. A granite marker etched with 129 names and a single line. USS Thresher, SSN-593, lost at sea, April 10th, 1963. Families gather here in crisp spring air, dressed in dark coats, hands folded over programs they can't bring themselves to read. No coffins, no flag-draped procession, no final salute. Just the names. You trace them with your fingers. Lieutenant, petty officer, technician, civilian engineer, each a life, now a line. You stop at one, the civilian photographer who went down for documentation. You wonder if he ever took a final photo. If that camera lies somewhere, rested and crumpled in the silt, the last flash. of light in a collapsing world. Back at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, the mood has changed. Gone is the quiet pride. In its place, obsession. With systems, with safety, with never letting it happen again. Inside the dry dock hangars, Subsafe protocols are gospel now. No part goes unchecked. No weld goes unscanned. Redundancy is the rule. If a pipe can burst, it must be able to burst and still not sink the boat. And so you walk through the birth of modern submarine safety. It's dry work, lots of clipboards and inspections, but it's sacred now. We can swallow state and fate as we see on the back of the Might. Submariners start speaking a new dialect, one of valves and certifications and backups to the backup. Here's your mainstream fact. The Subsafe program, created in direct response to the Thresh disaster, remains one of the most rigorous safety regimes in military history, and its track record is unmatched. Since its implementation, no Subsafe certified sub has been lost at sea. The system works, but the price of its creation is steep. Meanwhile, you visit shipyards where new boats are under construction. New Thresh-class submarines, named and redesigned, cautiously pushing the edge again. You walk their decks as inspectors crawl beneath panels with flashlights. You notice something small, a metal tag riveted to a control console. It reads, Certified Subsafe E. For those who never surfaced, it's unofficial, not regulation. But one removes it. You float to Washington, D.C., where congressional hearings pick at the Thresher's bones. Committees ask sharp questions, then blunter ones. Why weren't the emergency systems redundantly tested? Why were silver-brazed joint saws allowed to pass inspection? Why were multiple known issues still logged as non-critical? The Navy answers with the language of engineering. Failure chains, material limits, test conditions. But the questions linger. One senator says it plainly. Our best boat sank. We need to understand why that was possible. There's a long silence afterward. No one argues. You visit the training simulators next. Hulking steel-walled rooms built to mimic submarine compartments. Trainees now run failure scenarios inspired by Thresher's final minutes. Sudden reactor scrams, pipe ruptures, flooded electronics. They run the drills until it's muscle memory, until they can respond faster than thought, until surviving becomes instinct. One instructor turns to his class and says, if you ever feel like skipping protocol, remember Thresher. Remember how fast things can go wrong. Here's your quirky moment. At one training center, sailors leave plastic toy submarines on the memorial wall, Threshy-shaped, with tiny names sharpied on their hulls. It starts as a quiet gesture, then it spreads. There's something both childlike and sobering in it. This juxtaposition of plaything and death marker. Outside the memorial wall, there's a quote engraved in bronze. In the sea, we are all small. You read it once, then twice. It hits harder the second time. You now return to the families. It's a year later. Some are beginning to move forward, but grief has no set speed. One widow still sets an extra place at dinner. Another refuses to change the voicemail message her husband recorded. One father, himself a retired Navy man, builds model submarines in his garage. Each one is Thresher, over and over again. Historians still argue whether the tragedy could have been prevented with slower testing, more conservative dive limits, or stricter shipyard oversight. They debate engineering tolerances and metal fatigue and moisture in airlines. But none of that fits neatly into grief. Loss doesn't care about valve specs. And there's a truth without seeing clearly. It's not just a lesson. It's a wound, a permanent mark on the Navy's soul, but also a pivot point. one that redefined what safety meant in the nuclear age. You walk again through the wreckage, this time not under the sea, but through the archive rooms where photographs of the debris are stored. Image after image, crumpled steel, tangled wiring. The wreckage is catalogued clinically, but to you, it reads like an autopsy. Not of a ship, but of a moment in history, frozen and dissected. One photograph shows a pressure hull segment collapsed inward like an eggshell. Another shows a torpedo rack twisted as if by giant hands. You pause over one frame, a mess tray, dented and lying alone on the seafloor. You think of powdered lemonade and harmonica songs, of card games in the torpedo room, of men who were just living right up until they weren't. And then you visit the museum. Because yes, there is one. Inside a small wing of the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut, there's a display on Thresher. Artifacts, photos. A model, a chunk of her hull recovered from the deep. It's small, it looks ordinary, until you remember the weight it withstood, and then didn't. You stand before it, and it's impossibly quiet. Then, from the next room, you hear the low rumble of a tour guide explaining Thresher to a group of wide-eyed cadets. He's not theatrical. He doesn't need to be. He just says, every system we trust today, every life we protect, was shaped by what happened in 1963. They didn't die for nothing. They died to teach us better. You don't cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers. But later, when you're alone, you do. Now, it's decades later. You're still aboard, in a way, walking the ghost decks of memory, through generations that never forgot. Time has blurred the edges, softened the immediate sting, but it hasn't erased the impact. Not even close. You're standing at the Thresher Memorial in Kittery, Maine. It's summer. A breeze rolls in from the Piscataqua River. Kids are running nearby, chasing gulls. Tourists mill about with ice cream and maps. And just a few steps away, 129 names are still carved in granite. Still remembered. The memorial shape is simple. Clean lines, sober lettering. No grand statue, just silence and names. Someone's left a wreath. Someone else left dog tags. This is your final surface, a gentle one. You look around and you realize you're not alone in remembering. You're with every sailor who's trained under Subsafe, with every Navy engineer who double-checks a system because of what failed in 1963, with every family who still attends the annual fresh ceremony, daughters now grown, sons now with gray in their hair, grandchildren in navy-blue coats, far too big for their shoulders. Here's your historical beat. In 2021, after years of pressure from families and historians, the US Navy declassified over 3,000 pages related to the Thresher disaster. They detailed internal communications, inspection lapses, and never-before-seen evidence of the systemic issues leading up to that final dive. It confirmed what many already knew. This wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a human one too. And that's where the story settles, not just in tragedy, but in transformation. The Thresher's loss didn't fade into a forgotten chapter. It seeded a culture shift in naval engineering, in risk management, in submarine protocol. You trace it forward through every safe dive, every new sub-launch, every quiet surfacing under starlit skies. You feel its presence even now, baked into design checklists, echoing in the metal corridors of every nuclear sub that heads into the deep. But here's the quirky final note you didn't expect. There's a group of hobbyists who build Thresh-scale models out of recycled materials. Cardboard, 3D dash-printed hulls, hand-painted insignia. They bring them to lakes and ponds, launching them in silence, saluting once, before they gently guide them back to shore. It's not official. It's not on any Navy program. But it's heartfelt. It's grief turned into craft. Historians still debate what exact second the hull gave way. What depth, what angle, what internal moment of collapse. They argue whether leadership pushed the ship too fast after her overhaul, whether more time, more testing, might have made the difference. But the deeper truth isn't in timelines or pressure curves. It's in sacrifice, testing, and staging back. Oh. What's up, Mrs. Howe? It's this. It was a complete sentiment of the... You step now into the dreams of submariners who came after. Men and women who trained with the Thresher etched into their psyche. For them, she's not just a ship. She's a warning. A promise. A part of their DNA. You sit in a modern sub's control room now, much like the one Thresh had, but filled with newer screens, more fail-safes, redundancy triple-checked. Everything here is born from what went wrong then. You see it in the wiring, the air systems, the drill procedures. Thresher is everywhere and nowhere. The crew calls her the mother of Subsafe. And when someone makes a casual joke about a stuck valve or a power hiccup, the older officer nearby just says, "Ask Thresh if it's funny," and everyone falls quiet, because the sea doesn't forgive, it only remembers. You return one last time to that moment, April 10th, 1963. The silence after the final ping, the sea closing over, the world above trying to catch its breath. You float there, briefly, in that weightless dark, listening. And now, finally, the story slows, wind down, PM 300 words. You're still deep below, but it's quiet now. The machinery has stilled. The alarms have faded. Only the hush of the ocean remains, vast, unblinking, ancient. You drift through it gently, as if sleepwalking through a forgotten cathedral of pressure and time. Above you, miles of salt water rest like a stone blanket. And yet, somehow, it doesn't feel heavy anymore. You pass the wreckage one last time, not as wreckage now, but as a memorial. The twisted hull, the scattered panels, the silt-covered consoles, they're no longer signs of failure. They're monuments. They're testimony. They whisper lessons into the currents, forever teaching, forever warning. Far above, some light flickers down in fractured ribbons. It doesn't reach you, but it tries. And slowly, you rise. You surface in memory, in honor, in systems designed to protect the living by remembering the lost. Subsail watches over the next generation like a lighthouse in murky waters, flashing quiet signals. Check again, test again, respect the deep. The Thresher didn't vanish. Not really. She became the reason no one else has. So, take a moment, but breathe slowly. Let the weight of the ocean go. Let the silence close softly around this story. The sea keeps its secrets, but you heard one.